Hi, my name is Kristin. This is Kristin Kraves Books. So I am back with my second recent reads video. I got such a great response to the first one, so I'm thankful for that, and I really enjoyed filming that video because I really did think I could speak more in depth about all the books that I read. So I've read 7 books since the last recent reads video, and it just so happens it's the end of April, so I thought it was a perfect time to film the second one. And I read 3 physically, so I'll start with those. And the first one is actually a book I've talked about a lot because I've got this arc, and this book comes out in May, I believe May 3rd. So today, when you're watching this book is now available, and I've talked about it so much, and I love this. This is getting a lot of attention on Bookstagram. This is The Change by Kirsten Miller, by the way. And I have been seeing this going around Bookstagram already. I think this was an add-on for Book of the Month. If you are in the US, you can grab that, and I highly recommend it. And this is unlike anything I've ever read. It is a fantasy thriller, and it's really a feminist revenge story, and we're following 3 women who are going through menopause and really embracing their bodies and realizing that they all have special gifts. So one of them is really in tune with nature, and it's kind of like a mix of practical magic and revenge. That's what it is in my head. Another one can talk to the dead, and the other one kind of has extreme strength. And you have to go into this knowing that their powers and their gifts, they're not going to be explained to you. You just have to kind of go along with it and accept it. And I loved it. The female friendships in here are really amazing. These women were not friends until the beginning of this book, and they really are drawn to each other. And the woman that is able to speak to the dead realizes that a young girl's body is close by and enlists these other 2 women to help her find it, and they do. And then the police don't believe that this young girl was murdered. They think she was a runaway and a drug addict, and that's how she ended up on the side of the street. So, and these 3 women, they obviously know that that is not the case, and they believe that there's a serial killer, and things just unravel from there. And it's set in Montauk, so we get there's the richest of the rich people there, so it's a very elusive neighborhood they're trying to get into, so that's where that revenge aspect comes into play. We got backstories of all the women, which I really liked. Their careers are a big part of this, and their childhoods as well, and then their marriages as well. So one of them was recently divorced, one's husband passed away, and then the other is still married. So their relationships are a big part of this. There's a lot of discussions about motherhood as well. I will say there were moments in the middle, and especially in the second half, that dragged a little bit. I thought, yes, I liked all the backstory, but maybe we were getting too much. But it was all worth it for me in the end. There's also a podcast element that comes up in here, so if you like that, I think you would like this one. And I didn't see where this was going. And yeah, it took quite a turn. And there's also like a bit of a romance in here, a couple of romances actually. So yeah, I thought this was fantastic. Deserves all the hype it's been getting already. I hope that this becomes really popular. I can actually see this being a really great TV series. So yeah, I'm so grateful to HarperCollins Canada for sending me this, because I don't know that it would have been something that I would have picked up on my own, because I'm just discovering what I like about fantasy, and I've never read a fantasy thriller, but it does have that practical magic vibe, which I love. So I definitely recommend checking this out. It is a longer book, but because it's a thriller mystery, it does read pretty quickly. And then speaking of reading quickly, I read Other Words from Home by Jasmine Warga, and this is one of the books that was included in my 12 challenge. If you remember, the 12 challenge was going around at the beginning of this year, especially on Instagram and on Twitter, and this is one of the books that was included, and I'm so thankful that that person included this, because it's always been on my radar, but it's not one that I would have picked up on my own, I don't think, because it's very rare for me to pick up middle grade, and I would have missed a complete gem, because this was a 5-star read for me, a 1-sitting read. I highly recommend, if you're going to pick this up, sit down and read it all in one sitting. You can do that in a couple hours. It's so quick. It's written in verse. We're following this young girl, Jude, whose family is from Syria, and her mother have to go to America to avoid some of the conflicts that are going on there, and her brother stays behind and is fighting and protesting. So she's very close to her brother, so she's worried about her brother, and her father stays behind to run the family business. So it's just her and her mother living with her mother's brother, who she's never met before. So we're following this character coming to America, going to an American school. She always wanted to be a movie star, so we see her kind of getting into theater at her school, and that's a really sweet moment. It's a very bittersweet book. She makes friends, she misses her family, she's just trying to, that balance between what is home, is America home, is Syria home, but she cannot consider both home. She really becomes enlightened in that way, and she finds her voice, she finds herself, what makes her happy. And there's just some really sweet moments in here as well. I really loved the relationship that she develops with her mother. And yeah, I tabbed quite a bit of it because it's just so beautiful, and definitely a perfect one-sitting read, one that I think everybody of all ages should read. But if you have children who are middle grade age, I think this is a perfect book for them. And then of course I read the third book in the Memoirs Lady Trent series. This is The Voyage of the Basilisk, and this is by Marie Brennan. And I'm filming this on Monday, so yesterday afternoon we had our live show about this, and it was a very interesting discussion, a lot of mixed opinions, and I loved the first two books in the series quite a bit. I like the whole concept of this being fiction that reads like nonfiction. We're following Lady Trent, who is a naturalist following dragons, and we are getting her perspective on her time and her past. So she's like an older woman reflecting, writing her memoirs, but obviously it's all fiction, and she studies dragons. So you don't get as much dragons as you would think in the first two. There are a lot more dragon discussions in here, but it's important to know that it's not fantasy dragons. These do not, it's not magical dragons. They're like, it's as if you were observing lizards or any creature in the wild. It's that kind of thing. And this book, the gimmick of it being written like a memoir didn't work as much in this one as it did in the first two, and I don't know if that's because I'm tired of it or it just wasn't done as well in this one. And there are some conversations about gender in here that didn't sit quite well with me or the other people that are hosting the read along with me, so I definitely recommend checking out our discussion about that. And I did like the conversations about motherhood more than I did in the first two. Lady Trent, her son, is actually a character in here, which is great, but I actually wanted more time on the sea, in the sea. Like not very much of it is actually set in the water. I think maybe the first 25%, and then it's set on land after that, and I was here for a sea adventure, so that was a bit disappointing. I don't want to say too much more than that because this is the third book in a series, but I'm curious to see where the fourth one goes. And it is important to note as well that I am not a series reader. I talk about this quite a bit. So for me to read the third book in a series within the same year, that is strange for me. So maybe that is why I'm getting a little bit tired and bored of it. That is just me as a reader. So take that with a grain of salt. I read Her Name is Night by Yasmin Angoy on ebook. It's part of Kindle Unlimited, and I read that for the Assassins in April readathon. And actually I wanted to pull up the book one second because it opens with content warnings, and I think it's very, very important that you read those, so I want to read them to you. And if you hear a lot of noise, they're sweeping the streets outside, so that's what that is. But this says, please note that this novel depicts issues of emotional, sexual, and physical abuse, parental death, human trafficking, and both physical and sexual violence. The descriptions of violence are vivid, and I have worked to approach these topics with the utmost sensitivity and respect. I wanted you to be aware in case any of the content is triggering. Please use some resources below if you need support. So she has some resources down below, but I think it's really important to take those content warnings to heart because human trafficking is such a big part of this book, and it all happens on page, and it is quite graphic and difficult to read about. So we are following Echo, who is an assassin. She is working with this group to assassinate the bad guys, or so that is what she's told, but she starts to see that maybe that is not all true. And the chapters are written in the before and the after. So the before chapters, we are following Echo when she was known as Nina, and she was a child, and those are written in the first person, and she is kidnapped and sold into human trafficking. So it's very difficult to read about, and I thought it was effective the way that the author wrote those chapters in the first person, so you felt very deeply connected to Nina. And then the after chapters follow her as Echo, and there's a bit more distance, which I thought was effective as well, and that is written in the third person. And she eventually realized that somebody that she's working for was involved in her kidnapping, and she's seeking revenge. So is kind of badass in that way. She's a great character. There is the hint of a romance in here, which I didn't think was very strong or effective or needed. But yeah, this is a hard book to read. I wouldn't recommend this for everybody. There is a sequel coming out that I think I will read if I'm in the good place for it. But even though I had those content warnings beforehand, I don't think I was quite ready for just how dark this book was going to be. So do know that going in. It's not one that I universally recommend in any way, but I thought the writing was excellent, and I did think that the author handled these themes in a respectful, effective, sensitive way like she said she wanted to do, but just know that's a big part of this story. I think I said I read 7 books since my last video. It was 6, so sorry about that. But the next one, I listened to an ALC of Not Good for Maidens by Tori Bavellino, and this is a Goblin Market retelling. And Goblin Market is a poem that I think I read in philosophy, which I hated philosophy in high school, but this is the one thing that we read that I really enjoyed. So it is like a 40-page poem, and it is following these 2 sisters who are kind of lured into this goblin market with forbidden fruit. So it's that very classic trope, but I loved it. It was very atmospheric, and I do think that having some understanding of the original text is important to appreciate a lot of what happens in the Goblin Market. I don't normally say that for retellings. I think if you have a basis understanding of like the Beauty and the Beast or Pride and Prejudice, or even no understanding of those for a lot of the retellings, it doesn't matter so much. But in Not Good for Maidens, I think at least reading a summary online of the original poem Goblin Market will help you understand a lot of what happens in here. So this follows 2 timelines. One is sisters, and the one sister is lured into the Goblin Market, and we're following her journey through there, and she actually has a bit of a sapphic relationship with one of the goblins in there, and I won't tell you what happens there, but there's that timeline, which I really enjoyed. And then we're following the next generation of women in this family, and one of the cousins or aunts, I think it is actually the youngest sister of these 2 women, the sisters in the first timeline, goes missing into the Goblin Market, and then her niece is determined to find her aunt. And her family has kept all these secrets from her. She knew they were hiding something, but she didn't know the history of it, and this is all revealed to her. And she's the only one that could probably go in the market and come back out. So it's very atmospheric. I will never hear the song Scarborough Fair by Simon and Garfunkel in the same way again. Just know that. Yeah, I liked both timelines. I thought it all wrapped up very well. If you want something creepy and vivid, I really like the audiobook. There's not too much more to say about it. It's very much it parallels the Goblin Market very well, but does some interesting things. And it's very much about family relationships and womanhood, and a lot of great, interesting characters and lots of fun reveals. So I think that's going to be a popular one when it comes out. And then I listened to Unmasked, My Life Solving America's Cold Cases by Paul Holes. And I used to listen to and read a lot of true crime, but I really moved away from that recently. But I knew as soon as I saw that Paul Holes was writing a book that I was going to read it. And this is, Paul Holes was a detective who solved the Golden State Killer case. So if you're familiar with that whole thing, that is him. He became a bit of a phenomenon after that, if you remember that time. But this is his story of not just the Golden State Killer case, but that is a big part of it, but some of his other cases as well. And then how him being so invested in his work affected his personal life. So the failings of his first marriage, his relationship with the children he had from his first marriage, then his marriage to his current wife and having those children as well. So we get a lot of his personal conflicts that he has, but a lot of it really is focused on his cases. And if you liked I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, which I really loved, you have to read this because there's actually a whole chapter in here called Michelle, because Michelle and Paul Holes became very good friends. Michelle McNamara was simply just a normal person. She was actually Patton Oswalt's wife, and she became deeply invested in solving this case, and she was just on true crime forums and things like that, and she reached out to Paul Holes and they formed a relationship, and he bounced ideas off of her and stuff, and he talks a lot about their friendship in this book. And if you don't know, Michelle McNamara sadly passed away, so he talks about that, how that affected him as well, and a lot about the Golden State Killer case was solved through genetic testing, so using like ancestry.com or something like that. So he talks about the groundbreaking case of that, because I think that was the first time it was ever used, or one of the first times, and all the loopholes they had to go through and all the red tape and stuff. So I thought that was really fascinating, and I found it very respectful to all the victims. And he talks about how personal this feels to him and how invested he gets in the families and stuff. So I really adore Paul Holes. I thought this was one of the better true crimes books I have ever read. He does the audio book, so I highly recommend listening to it if you can, and it was really, really good. So those are all 6 books that I've read recently, and I am currently listening to Siren Queen by Nevo, and they're just such a great writer. I love their writing style. I'm only about 15% into it, but I'm super curious. There's a lot going on. It's kind of hard to orient yourself in the world. It's set in the old Hollywood, and there are monsters involved, so I think that has the potential to be fantastic. And I am physically reading The Night Shift by Alex Finlay very early on in that one as well. It's been a minute since I read a thriller, but I can already tell I kind of like this. There's like the setting of 1999 is interesting, and I like that we are following a therapist who was the sole survivor of that massacre, so I'm curious to see how this all unfolds. So those 2 will definitely be my next recent reads videos, and thank you for watching and for supporting my channel. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.